Thank you for joining us this evening for the University of New Mexico's 57th Annual Research Lecture. I would like to welcome our distinguished guests, Mr. Jeffrey Bustamante from Congressman Ben Ray Lujan's office. In addition, I would like to recognize Regent Jake Wellman and our Dean of the College of Engineering, Kathleen Roman. I especially want to thank Dean Roman's staff for their assistance with this event. Tonight is a celebration. I'm all in favor of celebration. It is a celebration of the significant achievement of Professor Stephanie Forrest and to present her with this year's annual Research Lecturer Award, which is the highest honor for research and creativity that the UNM faculty bestows on a colleague. The University of New Mexico places high value on research, and it prides itself on being designated as a very high research university by the Carnegie Foundation. This is a designation for universities actively engaged in research in a broad range of disciplines and fields. Last year, UNM faculty researchers generated more than $125 million in external awards in support of the research venture. This value represents but one aspect of our faculty's commitment to research and is also illustrative of their commitment to excellence. UNM faculty success in securing these awards provides the university with critical resources to enhance the quality of teaching and student participation in research efforts. It is important to note that research funds provide valuable opportunities for all our students to engage in cutting-edge research with national and international exposure and a wealth of experience that will contribute to their future success. We recognize that it is our faculty that leads the way in these endeavors, and tonight, on behalf of the entire university, I would like to thank Professor Forrest for her contributions and her leadership in UNM's research venture. We look forward to her lecture on biological models for software security. As a testament to the excellence of Professor Forrest's research contributions at UNM, Dr. Stephen Hoffmeyer will provide tonight's introduction of Professor Forrest. As a former student and now as a collaborator at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, he is very familiar with the high caliber of her work. Dr. Hoffmeyer is currently engaged in research related to high-performance computing, operating systems, and complex natural systems. 3 years ago, he began Department of Energy-funded collaboration with Professor Forrest on a new research project on the impact of malicious elements in the evolution of complex systems. Following Professor Forrest's lecture, there will be a brief question and answer period, and then our Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, Chowki Abdallah, will present the UNM Research Lecture Award to Professor Forrest. This will be followed by a short congratulatory reception in the STAM room. Steve.
Good evening. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Professor Stephanie Forrest, or Steph as her grad students know her. As one of Professor Stephanie Forrest's early PhD students, I got to experience firsthand her rare talents for mentoring and encouraging students, and among many others have benefited greatly from her guidance. I learned so much, and not only from her direct guidance, but also from observing her at work and her approach to research. In my mind, there are two greatest talents of Stephanie Forrest. They're her creativity and her instinct for important and big ideas. And these are ideas that are not only important, but they're exciting and fascinating. And it's these ideas that are so exciting that have managed to draw to her many graduate students over the years, many of high caliber. Stephanie's instinct for great ideas was evident early in her career when she was a grad student and working with Bob Axelrod at the University of Michigan. She worked on the evolution of cooperation using genetic algorithms to evolve strategies for the prisoner's dilemma. This work continues to excite interest today, and I believe she still occasionally gets emails about code she wrote 25 years ago. After obtaining a PhD from the University of Michigan in 1985, Steph was a director's fellow at, at Los Alamos National Lab, and then 2 years later, she became a faculty member in computer science at the University of New Mexico. For her, this was a return to New Mexico because she'd done her BA at St. John's College in Santa Fe in 1977. After moving to New Mexico, Steph continued to work in the field of genetic and evolutionary algorithms. This was an area that was small, obscure, and well outside the mainstream of computer science at the time. However, today it is widely recognized, and genetic algorithms have been used as powerful tools for computer science, as you will hear when Steph mentions them in her talk tonight. Steph, with her instinct for new and important directions, was one of the early influential pioneers in the field of genetic algorithms. Together with Melanie Mitchell, she investigated the royal road for genetic algorithms, that is, trying to determine what makes a problem hard or easy for a genetic algorithm to solve. The work she did, this foundational work, has formed the basis for much ongoing research into the fundamentals of how genetic algorithms work. Stephanie's work in this and other areas was recognized when she received the National Science Foundation's Presidential Young Investigator Award in 1991. And it was one of 20 awards that were awarded nationally that year across all disciplines of science. Genetic algorithms are a great example of using ideas from biology to improve technological systems. Indeed, this is one of the great themes of Professor Forrest's research. She long ago recognized that human engineering is but a pale shadow of the power and complexity of biological systems. Biological systems are autonomous, they're resilient, they're robust, and remarkably adaptable. By contrast, our engineered systems are brittle, they're inflexible, and they break easily, and they don't adapt. Think of what progress could be made if only we could build systems more like biological systems. But Steph made sure that the borrowed ideas from biology were not just buzzwords. She made sure to collaborate with biologists and educate herself and her students so that she could better accomplish true interdisciplinary work. The fruits of this dedication are nowhere more apparent than in her application of immunology to computer security. The immune system is incredibly successful at protecting highly complex environment, the body, from an almost unlimited diversity of disease, pathogens, and other nastiness that's out there. Most of us are healthy most of the time. Our computer systems, although much simpler than human bodies, are in many ways much more poorly protected. Distilling the problem down to its essence, in 1996, Dr. Forrest, together with myself and another grad student, Anil Somayaji, came up with the notion of defining self for a computer system by looking at sequences, looking at the dynamic behavior of running programs. We showed that under normal behavior, the code was very predictable, but when attacked, it deviated, and that could be detected. This work has had profound implications and has led to a whole area of work in anomaly intrusion detection, and there's many practical applications today. Professor Forrest continues to be driven by the desire to make computer systems more like biological systems. In her most recent work, she has focused on the idea of automatically fixing bugs in software without any human intervention. I think this is a really fascinating topic, and it's one she's going to talk a lot about tonight. Tonight, her talk is focused on biological models for software security. But this is not the only way of bridging the gap between biology and computation that has inspired her work. She's also done a large part of her research by focusing on computational models of biological systems. The basic question is, how can we use tools for computational systems to improve our understanding of biological systems? For example, together with Derek Smith and Alan Perlson, in 1999, she developed computational models of how the immune system reacts to mutating viruses, such as influenza. Derek Smith, who's now at the University of Cambridge, has continued this work, and its importance is evidenced by the fact that these sorts of computational models are now used by the World Health Organization as part of the annual influenza vaccine strain selection process. The interdisciplinary nature of Steph's research and its focus on complex systems made it a perfect match for the Santa Fe Institute, where she has been a key figure over the years, serving as Vice President for Academic Affairs in 1999, and currently is our co-chair of the Science Board. I've only touched on aspects of the many fascinating and significant achievements of Dr. Forrest's research career. The breadth and scope of her work, its successful interdisciplinary nature, was recognized last year when she was awarded the ACM AAAI Alan Newell Award. This award was created in honor of Alan Newell, one of the founders of artificial intelligence. It is given once a year to an individual for career contributions that have breadth within computer science or that bridge computer science and other disciplines. So, if you've ever wondered how we can make artificial systems better, how we can make them more robust, more secure, how we can make them more autonomous, and basically more like biological systems, then I urge you to follow Steph's research in future and enjoy what promises to be a fascinating talk tonight. Please join me in welcoming Professor Stephanie Forrest.
Wow, thanks, Steve. Thank you. That makes me feel old. And I have to get rid of Steve's introduction and make sure that I actually give my talk instead of give the introduction all over again. But first, let me see if I can get some slides. So we in computer science are especially dependent on PowerPoint. And I apologize for that. I always admire the people from other disciplines who can just come up and give a talk with no crutch. But I need a crutch. And so hopefully the crutch will come up on the screen here. Okay, let me just, okay, can people see that? If you have a hard time seeing in the back, just tell one of the officials and we can turn the lights down more because I want everyone to be able to see this. Okay, so now we're going to get started. Students like Steve are the reason that UNM is such a great university, and I've been just so fortunate in my career at UNM to have the best students anyone could imagine. And this is as many of them as I could find pictures of in the past couple of days on the web. And many of you will recognize yourselves, and I'm missing a few. But really, the reason I've just had great students. They not only are they smart and go on to do illustrious things like Steve mentioned, but they take significant intellectual risks when they come to work with me. They challenge my vague ideas, and they turn them into science and engineering, making them, taking them further than I could ever do on my own. And so I really thought it was just so appropriate when I was figuring out who should introduce me to ask one of my students. So thank you, Steve, for that nice introduction. It's a great honor to have this opportunity to share my work with you, colleagues, friends, and family, who are in the truest sense of the word, my community. And just at the reception tonight, I have to say, it kind of brings tears to my eyes how many of you came out. In addition to my students, I would like to recognize my fellow faculty in computer science, which has been my home for the past 20 years, maybe a little bit more by now. They, especially in the early days, put up with my flaky research ideas long before they were socially acceptable. And I honestly believe that I could never have done the research I'm going to tell you about today if I'd been at a more centrally located, more conventional university. And I'm very grateful for that. I would also like to recognize my friends from the biology department, because the biology department here at UNM has been my second home. And they have taught me biology, helped me mentor students, helped get funding, and really have been wonderful colleagues. Finally, I would like to thank my closest colleague, friend, and husband, Fred Carey, who has supported me through many low points and frantic deadlines as only a husband can. He also proofreads, inspires me to be a better teacher, cooks much better than I do, and from time to time he corrects my immunology, which I find incredibly irritating. So thank you, Fred, and all the rest of you, both for coming tonight and for making UNM such a wonderful place. And now that's the end of my formalities, and we'll get on to business. I hope, yes. So my talk tonight concerns the use of concepts from biology to address important problems in cybersecurity. And I have three major themes. First, we can understand the biological mechanisms and designs in biology in terms of their information processing functions that they do. And in my line, my shorthand for that is biologies are computers. And once we look at biology that way, we can use these concepts to suggest novel approaches to problems throughout computer science. And tonight we'll be focusing on computer security. And finally, when we look more closely at modern software, we see that it has acquired many biological properties over the 40 years or so that it's been with us, evolving at the hands of individual programmers. And this suggests to me that the distinction between biology and computation is very thin. So these are, that's okay. Those are the themes. So these are some of the aspects of biology that have fascinated me the most over the years. Biological systems, resilience is kind of a buzzword these days, and biological systems are kind of the quintessential resilient system. And how do they do that? How do they withstand and respond appropriately to environmental conditions that they weren't designed for ahead of time? And they do that using a number of mechanisms. Homeostasis is the body, I'm giving you the computer scientist interpretation of these. So homeostasis is the biology's way of maintaining itself in normal operating tolerances. So the body is continually making little adjustments to, for example, keep the internal temperature of a mammal at a constant temperature, almost independent of what the outside environment is. And there are many, many, many other homeostatic mechanisms in biology. Biology is also interesting to me because it's built out of multitudes of disposable components. So we have cells in our body that live for some period of time and then die and turn over. And they turn over many, many times during our lives. But somehow we're still ourselves. And it doesn't, just because a cell dies doesn't mean that the rest of us fall apart. Biological systems use diversity to provide robustness, and we'll get back to that later in the talk. So those are just some of the ways in which I think biological systems achieve this very remarkable resilience. They also can adapt to changes in their environment, and when they are injured, they can repair themselves much better than our computers can, I have to say. There's some evidence now, much of it pioneered by Jim Brown's work from biology, that the internal networks in biological systems, such as your vascular system that delivers oxygen and nutrients to all the cells in the body, that those networks are optimized to minimize energy and maximize the delivery of resources. And finally, these are just a few of the things. They're the ones I've kind of focused on most in my work. Impressively, all of these have been produced by evolution. So I am not the only person to be interested in these ideas of biology and how they might be applied to computing. In fact, there's an entire field called biologically inspired computing. And the pieces tonight that I'll be, kind of sub areas in this field that I'll be talking about, giving examples of, are the artificial immune systems and the genetic algorithms. But I just don't want you to go away thinking that I'm the only person in the world who ever thought up this idea. These are all big fields. They have their own conferences, multiple journals, and we all churn out graduate students, as fast as we possibly can. Okay, so before we get into how to use biology, I think it's worth asking, does computer security need ideas from biology? And the answer is definitely. Computer security isn't actually very secure anymore. And we're really losing what many people refer to as the arms race with these adversaries. And so I know you can't see this, and I couldn't figure out a way to make this bigger, but this little strip here on the left side of the screen kind of shows the history, the evolutionary history, I would like to say, of the different kinds of computer attacks over about the past 20, maybe 25 years. And so at the top, we sort of had the first era. The older members of the audience will remember file infector viruses and all of those that were spread using floppy disks. Remember that? That was a long time ago. That was the early era. Then we all got onto the internet. That seemed like a really great idea, except what happened? Then we had these malicious attacks spreading automatically through the networks. So you might remember the Morris worm. That was in the late 1980s. And then Code Red and NIMDA later. That's this sort of second era. The third era then was once everyone started using the web seriously. And e-commerce came along, and we started having a lot of information up on these web pages. And so the attacks followed right along. And we had an era of web-based attacks. And now we're kind of dealing with this social networks era. And indeed, guess what? The malicious attacks are coming to the social networks. And so we really need arms races. I mean, we really need new approaches to contend with this and if possible, anticipate what's going to be next. The other point I want to make is this is important to all of us. As at the same time that this evolution's been going on, the technologies that support these new attacks have come to take on more and more important roles in our lives. And so we really, at this point, have so much of our lives not supported by computers. I mean, it's on our computers, is what I want to say, that we really have to face up to this cybersecurity problem. And so, again, I'm not the only person to observe that. Cybersecurity research is a big theme in Washington, D.C., and the people who run these programs at the major funding agencies, they have this idea that this is a problem that we should have solved by now. They threw a lot of money at it 10 years ago, and a lot of people started doing computer security research, and why isn't it solved yet? And my reaction to that is, you shouldn't expect to solve it. This is going to be a co-evolutionary world, just like biological systems, and we really need to learn how to manage it and live with it, rather than having this idea that if we just build a bigger hammer, we can wipe it out, and then we can move on to the next problem. Okay, and then one final point. Most of you have probably heard about Moore's Law. This is this law, I guess, a description of how fast computing power increases. And a rough description of it is that every 18 months we expect to have about double the processing power. And we've had similar kinds of trajectories with memory capacities and networking speeds. And in much of computer science, Moore's Law makes it possible for us today to solve problems that we absolutely couldn't think about solving 20 years ago, just because we have more processing power. And in fact, the assignment, I know there's some people from my class here tonight. Thank you for coming. The assignment that I gave you is something that we just couldn't have imagined doing when I was in graduate school, this assignment that I just passed out this week. And that's great. But in computer security, Moore's Law helps the adversaries just about as much, maybe more, as it helps the defenders. And so that's another thing that makes this problem hard and challenging, but also fascinating. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit to convince you that computer security really matters in your life. And one example of one of these novel attacks that had never been seen before was the Stuxnet cyber attack against the Iranian nuclear facilities. And I don't know exactly when the attack was launched. It was discovered publicly in 2010. And a really interesting thing about it is it was, as far as we can tell, I don't have a security clearance, so there's a lot I don't know, but as far as we can tell, it was intended just to go to Iran and that no one was ever going to know about it. And guess what happened? Just like biology, that virus got out of Iran and it spread around the world, spread remarkably far around the world. And Symantec, one of the leading computer security companies, noticed it. And that's how we found out about Stuxnet. So I personally believe that this Stuxnet event was an important moment in history. And I think it will have ramifications on international relations and how we think about them for some time to come. And I sort of don't think it matters that we think the side that got attacked was the bad guys and the side doing the attacking was the good guys. I think it's still a very important event. But underneath it all, it's just software. It's just software that was programmed to interfere with the centrifuges in these nuclear facilities and destroy them. Okay, so just one last thing on how important the problem is, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about what to do about it. This is a little chart. There are zillions of charts like this. I had a hard time deciding which one to pick. This shows, over the past 10 years, how many new software vulnerabilities, new methods of attack have been discovered. And as you can see, it's just, in spite of all this interest in cybersecurity, it's just this steadily increasing path. So that's another piece of evidence, and there's many others, that our security isn't working so well and we need to do something to improve it. So I like to say that if we want to think about security seriously, we should look at biology, because biology is the science of security. And that's a little bit, for those of you who are in the cybersecurity world, that's a little bit of a play, because there are several funding programs now that are labeled the science of security. So it's a little bit of a play on that idea. But the reason I think this is that biological systems from the beginning have evolved in the presence of adversaries. Viruses, bacteria, other species, predators, et cetera, et cetera. And along the way, in order to survive, they've had to evolve these incredibly pervasive, multi-level and complex defense systems. And so just one example of that, just to explain the picture, this is an immune cell that is eating, it's a macrophage, eating these yellow things are bacteria. And that's just one small component of our immune system. And so I've been interested in these biological defense systems as possibly suggesting new approaches for our cybersecurity problem. And by the way, I'm using the term computer security and cybersecurity equivalently. The old term was computer security, and now for some reason we're supposed to call it cybersecurity for reasons I've never totally understood. So here's an example of the kind of problem that biology has to solve, has to confront. This is a leaf, a plant that has a lot of berries right here. And on this plant is an ant. And the ant has been infected. The ant is usually black, but it's been infected by a parasite, roundworm, that causes its abdomen to turn red. And so what happens is when birds come along to eat some of these berries, there's a good chance they'll be confused and they'll eat the ant, or at least the back side of the ant, and pick up all the eggs from the parasites, fly away, and spread the parasite. So this is what's known as a mimicry attack. We have mimicry attacks in computing, but they are nowhere near as interesting or sophisticated as these. So that's just one example. I mean, there's all kinds of things like this. So how does biology cope with this defense problem? Well, it uses what computer scientists would say is a strategy of defense in depth. And what does that mean? That means having many layers of defense at all levels of the system. So the immune system has several very interesting defense mechanisms inside every single cell. And we're not going to talk about those, but they are very important and very interesting. It also has a lot of these mechanisms that work at the level of the organism, like the homeostasis example that I gave you, and other kinds of automated self-healing responses. And then it has these three other layers that we're going to talk about. First, the immune system. And the immune system itself is a layered defense. It has an innate defense. That's kind of the general purpose, your skin, mucous membranes, general inflammatory responses. And then it has this specific or adaptive response, which kind of kicks in if a pathogen gets past all those initial barriers and starts replicating in the body, then your body actually has a learning algorithm that it uses to develop detectors to recognize it. And that learning algorithm is actually a form of evolution. So you have evolution running in your immune system every time you get sick, and that's a good thing. And then also this principle of diversity that I'll come back to, but the fact that all of us have unique immune systems is a big help in terms of whatever terrible germs you've all brought in with you that are circulating around tonight. And I'm hoping that my diversity is going to keep me from getting sick with any of them. And similarly for all of you. Okay, so I don't know how much time I have left. Half an hour, hopefully, right? Okay. So what I want to do is give 3 examples. One that sort of uses some ideas from immunology, and each of these examples is going to be framed in terms of a particular problem, and a particular problem that is important to all of us. And so for immunology, I picked the problem of privacy. And you know, our whole society is based on the idea of individuality. We just voted, most of us, I hope, voted a couple of days ago. And you know, our democracy is based on the idea that when we go vote, no one else can find out how we voted, and we can't tell anyone else how we voted. We can't sell our vote. And although in this state we're still voting on paper, we've gone back to paper, sooner or later we're going to be doing it electronically. And the main way we have to protect those votes at the moment is cryptography, and I'll tell you some problems with that in a minute. The second case study is going to involve evolutionary computation or genetic algorithms. And there I'm going to highlight the problem of buggy software, which, as I will show, has huge economic significance for us. And finally, I'm going to talk about this idea of computational diversity, and I'm going to frame that in terms of the risks of having a standardized infrastructure. You know, we get great economies of scale. Engineers love standardization. We get great economies of scale by making a lot of things that are all identical. But every time we do that, and I focus on computers, but it's probably true everywhere else, we are sort of setting ourselves up for a single point of failure. So if there's something wrong with that design or some way that someone can figure out how to take advantage of it, then the entire population is vulnerable. Okay, so this is the digital immunology part of the lecture. And I'm going to give you a computer scientist's view of the immune system, with apologies to the real immunologists in the audience. So the immune system's main job is to protect the body from foreign pathogens. And as I show here in this little ancient cartoon sketch done by one of my wonderful students, the system consists of cells and molecules. So each of these little shapes is kind of a cartoon of a cell. And what happens when you're infected with a pathogen is that a virus or a bacteria comes into the body. That's the red thing. And your body has this immune system, whatever that is. It's all these blue cells, each of which is a slightly different shape. Has receptors on the surface of the cell, all of which are a little bit unique. And if you're lucky, there will be one of those immune cells right here that is complementary with the attacking pathogen and can bind to it. And that binding event is what we would call in computer science a recognition, pattern recognition. And after that binding event, then a whole cascade of different things takes place, somewhat depending on the particular type of this infecting virus. And ultimately, the pathogen is eliminated from the body. And this is This is really impressive for 2 reasons. First, these pathogens are replicating. Okay, once they get inside your body, they're replicating as fast as they can. So your immune system is really in a race against time. And secondly, the immune system, this recognition has to be very, very specific, because otherwise the immune system is going to get confused. You know, if this looks a little bit like this one over here, if they look too similar, the immune system might start attacking itself. And that is the problem of autoimmunity. It's a huge medical problem, and it's evidence of how hard this problem of distinguishing self from other really is. And by the way, this is my cartoon view, but what it really looks like, this is an immune cell here that is binding to a cell that's been infected, and you can kind of see it's a little messier than the way I actually drew it. Okay, but we in computer science are never afraid of abstraction. So we take this messy thing right here, and we do what I like to refer to as the fundamental modeling abstraction of really all theoretical immunology. And we model those receptors on the surfaces of cells as just strings of 1s and 0s, bit strings. And similarly, the patterns that are expressed on the surface of the cells that have been infected are also represented as strings. And then what we do is define a matching rule, a way to say when 2 strings bind together. The most common thing to do is just count up how many positions, like here's a 0, here's a 0, so you would say it matches at that position. And then count up how many positions in the string we actually have a match. And that's known as Hamming distance, or the inverse of Hamming distance. And that's the most common way we define binding in our digital immune systems. So once we've taken this step, then we can make immune systems just by generating these binary strings. And we can encode in them all kinds of different things. Here's some of the things that we've played around with. We've looked at Unix system calls. These are specific functions that are called when programs run. We've looked at network packets. We've looked at routes, networking routes. And we've looked at web requests, like when you click on a URL, the actual string that gets sent. We've used all of those as definitions of self in our work. So now if we wanted to build an immune system out of these little digital strings, what would we have to do? Well, first we have to figure out what we mean by self. And then we might want to have some of these innate responses, like firewall. A firewall would be a nice example of an innate response. It's sort of like the skin around the edge of a network. But then we would want to build some of these adaptive responses that learn how to recognize new patterns into our system. And then we would also want the system to be able to respond automatically once it had detected something that was foreign. And then finally, I added this because I got asked this question so often. Yes, you would have to do something to protect the immune system. So we've worked on all these pieces except for the last one. And I don't have time to talk about all of them, so I will just focus a little bit on one piece of this problem of defining self. Oh, I'm so used to asking people if they have questions, but I'm not going to get through, so I'm just going to keep charging. So an important feature of the immune system is the way it distributes its detection. And I guess I failed to mention that earlier, but as a computer scientist, one of the most impressive things about the immune system is the fact that it's distributed throughout our bodies, and there's no centralized immune organ that is directing traffic. You know, there's no heart for the immune system. So how does it do that? Well, it does it using this trick called negative selection. So this is the immune cell, and the idea is it's supposed to bind to non-self, right? The attacking pathogen, not supposed to bind to self. So how does it do that? Well, we in our bone marrow generate many of these detectors at random, and then we keep the detectors that fail to match self. So I should explain, this square is supposed to represent all the possible patterns that you could imagine, molecular patterns that you could imagine making. And this blob here that I'm calling self are going to be all those patterns that occur routinely in your body. all the different little pieces of proteins that get produced. And these detectors are, each of them are going to, they're going to be general. They're going to cover some number of these non-self patterns. And they're going to be engineered in such a way that they never match self. That's to avoid autoimmunity. And if you generate enough of them, then pretty much anything you get infected with, you'll have a detector there that can come to the rescue. And it's a very cute trick, and it is my belief that that is why the immune system is able to be so distributed and not centrally coordinated. Okay, so now, remember I had case studies and I had the problems. Here's problem number one, the problem with cryptography. So the standard cryptography thing, this happens every time you buy a book from Amazon and use an authenticated network connection. This is a standard setup. There are all kinds of variations on it. And, but classically, Alice is trying to send a message to Bob, and Alice wants to encrypt the message so that it can't be read by anyone along the way, like a credit card, right? If I'm going to send my credit card number, I don't want anyone to be able to read it. And so Alice uses a key to encrypt her message and send this kind of gobbledygook, the ciphertext, across this open channel, and Eve can't detect it. And then Bob on the other side has a key. Sometimes, in some schemes, it's the same key, and in some schemes, it's a different key, and can decrypt the message and read it. And so that's kind of the classic setup. So what are the problems with it? Well, first of all, almost all encryption depends on one assumption. And it's, just think back to middle school when you had to learn how to do prime factoring. You know, 21, 3 times 7 is the prime factors of 21. Well, it is believed, but it has never been proved, that finding the prime factorization of extremely large numbers is infeasible. That is, we can't do it with all the computers that you could make with all the atoms in the universe. And so almost all encryption is based on this single idea, that factoring numbers into their prime factors is a hard task computationally. And that's great, but it is one of these single points of failure, and people are a little nervous because quantum computing is potentially a way of breaking that assumption. So that's one problem. The second problem, which is the one I'm more interested in, is that it requires these keys, and these keys are secrets. And in particular, you know, let's just change let's not think about Amazon, let's think about our hospital and medical records. I would like my medical records to be kept private, but that requires me giving my information to the hospital and then trusting the hospital to encrypt it and to keep track of these keys, not to lose them, not to let someone else get hold of them. And so it always kind of requires this trusted authority and this, this secret, the key. And then also in energy environments where, like cell phones and things like that, encryption algorithms are computationally expensive and they suck a lot of energy. Not to be too colloquial. Okay, so we're going to use this idea of negative selection right here. And you can think of all these little blue detectors, these little T cells, you can think of them as a negative representation of what self is. They're kind of the complement of self. Just like this vase the vase could kind of be defined in terms of these two faces, silhouettes. So this is this figure versus ground idea. And we have used this, this idea of negative selection and the figure versus ground idea in many applications, including the anomaly intrusion detection that I worked on with Steve many years ago, information filters, negative databases, and then what I'm going to talk to you about is some recent work we've done on private data collection. And I'm going to have to start going really fast if I'm going to get through my slides. So we're going to consider some scenarios. I'm only going to tell you about one scenario. Let's imagine an air pollution. It would be nice if all of our cars had air pollution monitors and could send their air pollution readings back to some central location. And the central location could aggregate the information and publish a map of where the most serious air pollution problems are. And you could also do that with radiation detection. Well, that's a really great idea, except if the state of New Mexico comes to you and says, why don't you put this little device on your car that's going to tell me, send in where you are, your location, and the air pollution reading, you might not want to do that because you might not trust that central location, the state or a radio station. You might not want them to know where you are all the time. So that's called location privacy. And so that kind of problem where you're collecting a lot of data, it's location sensitive, and really all we need is the aggregate collection of the values by location is what we worked on here. And so the idea is these are 3 sensors. They could be your cell phones. They're each sensing a value. Blue in this case, red in this case, and green in this case. And they're sending a value back to the base station. So instead of sending the value that they recorded, they're actually going to send, like the blue one's going to send it red, the red one's going to report blue, green one's going to report red. So they just pick randomly out of the set of values that they didn't read. And so if this is the actual, let's say each of these is a different location or a different air pollution value or something, and these are the number of readings of that category, that's like the original distribution, what was really sensed. What it looks like when it gets sent to the base station is like this. But using a very computationally efficient trick, not trick, just an equation right down there that I definitely don't have time to explain, we can reconstruct the original histogram very, very effectively. And so the advantage of this, of course, is there's no secret. There's no key. All I do is report something that I didn't have. And that idea really is kind of like the negative selection idea. OK, this is that's the end of part 1. And I know I have to do the next 2 parts quite quickly. The last part is just a slide. So let's go to evolutionary computation. This idea of doing Darwinian evolution in a computer was invented by several people, but John Holland was the main one. And the basic idea, so that's a picture of John. He was my thesis advisor, by the way. There's three really central ideas in Darwinian evolution. Random variation, differential reproduction, that is, of the random variations, the ones that are more fit get more babies, and inheritance, that the babies inherit the trait that made the variation. And so John had the idea of putting this into a computer. These are little bit strings. These are like going to be the individuals in the population. We have some fitness function that assigns a value to each of these. So a simple one might be how many ones are in the string. The more ones, the better, something like that. And then we differentially reproduce. That is, we select out the ones that aren't very good. We make copies of the ones that are good. And then using analogs of biological mutation and crossover, we actually make new strings, variations on these original strings that had high fitness. And we just repeat that process over and over again. So that's what a genetic algorithm is. OK, so now we get to problem number 2, the problem of software. This is really embarrassing for all the computer scientists in the room. I mean, we've been programming for a long time, and it's terrible. We have too many bugs. There's this great quote from one of the developers of Mozilla. That's Firefox, for those of you who use the Firefox browser. It takes too long to fix them. Even security critical errors often take up to a month to get deployed. And even worse, I mean, it's ridiculously expensive. So one of the NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technologies, they published a report a couple of years ago that the annual cost of software errors, this isn't just the software. This is why majoring in computer science is a good thing, because there's lots of jobs in software. This is just the cost of the software bugs, is just about 0.6% of the GDP. That is a huge amount. And people really haven't been focusing very much on how to deal with this. But we have more bugs than we can fix by hand, and it's too expensive to fix them by hand. And in fact, the problem's gotten so bad that we now have these things called bug bounties. So these are just a few examples of companies that have put up on their websites bug bounties. And the idea is they're going to pay strangers. They're outsourcing their bug repair. They're going to pay strangers to find their bugs and fix them. And I'm trying to go a little more quickly here. But anyway, we did the computation for one of these companies, TarSnap. And they, over a 4-month period, they paid money, real money, for about 200 bugs, exactly 200 bugs. And out of those 200, 125 were just like spelling errors and, you know, indentations, things that don't really affect the running behavior of the code. But 75 of them were actually what we would call true positives. And they paid, without going through the math, $17 for each of those successful repairs, the ones in red, and they got one of those about every 40 hours over this 4-month period. And so the 75 out of 200 is 38% that were actual bug repairs. So remember those numbers, because we're going to talk about how to use a genetic algorithm to do this automatically. And I have to acknowledge here my collaborator in Virginia, Wes Weimer, and his students, and I have a whole host of students. Those are the two who've been most involved. And the idea here is to use biological evolution to automatically repair software bugs and generic bugs. So by that I mean we don't know ahead of time what kind of bug it is, if it's an infinite loop or a buffer overflow or something. And we want to do this on code that already exists. So legacy code, as it's called, all that code that's out there that has all those defects in it. So how are we going to do it? We're going to use our friend, the genetic algorithm. So we're going to take the program, the source code representation of the program. In this case, it was written in the C language. And we're going to assume that we have a set of test cases. Large software programs typically have large test suites. The required input-output pairs. You know, like if it's supposed to add 2 numbers, your test suite might have 2 and 3, and then it's supposed to output 5, right, if it can add correctly. So hundreds of those things, sometimes thousands in big programs, or tens of thousands. So we're going to assume we've got a set of these test cases, but we've got one that doesn't work. So we've got a negative test case that illustrates the bug. We're going to take this program, and I'm skipping badly here for the computer scientists. I can talk to you afterwards. We make 40 copies of it, each with a few mutations. And then we take these programs out one by one. This is our scale. And we run them on the inputs. And we measure their fitness by how many of the test cases they can pass successfully. And the ones that do well, we recirculate back into the evolutionary process with more mutations and sometimes crossovers. And the ones that do poorly, we throw away. And after a very few trips around that loop, this loop here, we hopefully produce a program that can pass all the test cases. And that's what we mean when we say we've repaired the bug. Okay, so what are the mutation operations? Again, I'm going to have to go quickly here. This is a program written in the C programming language. And one of the mutations that we do is to randomly delete a line, a statement. So our operations all work on statements. So we just take that statement out of the program. That's kind of like biological evolution, mutation. We do another one, which is swap. We just pick 2 random statements. They don't even have to be next to each other. And swap them in the program. And the third one is we pick up a place randomly in the program, like here, and we copy that statement down to some other place in the program. So those are our 3 mutations. We also have crossover, but I'm not talking about that. Okay, so here's my example. Everyone remember the Microsoft's answer to the iPod a couple years ago? It was called the Zune player. And they sold a lot of these Zune players right before Christmas. And on New Year's Eve, these things started freezing up. And that was a big problem for Microsoft. And it turned out the problem was a bug in this line of code that translates the date represented in the number of days since 1980, translates it into a year. It's supposed to print out the current year. So it takes an integer value, number of days since 1980, goes around this loop a few times, and it's supposed to print out the right year. And guess what? 2008 was a leap year, and it just didn't, the code even tried to handle the leap year, but it didn't do it right. Okay? That's what people in programming classes have to contend with all the time. Okay, so we made 40 copies of this thing, each with a few mutations, and we gave it to our program, our genetic algorithm, which, by the way, we call GenProg. That's the name of it. And after a couple of generations, it had inserted this statement right here, and it inserted another statement there, kind of blown up. Anyway, those were the two things it inserted, and that was enough for it to pass the negative test case, to get the 2000, well, to get the leap year right. But then it forgot how to pass all the positive test cases that it had. So we sort of went in the wrong direction. We fixed the problem, but we caused some other problems. So then we ran it for another few generations, and it ultimately produced a repair where it deleted a line from here and inserted a line up here. And it happened to be the same line, but that is somewhat coincidence. And it did this, I am proud to say, applause, please. Hold your applause, 42 seconds. Hold your applause. Anyway, we thought that was pretty impressive. And so we have spent a lot of our time over the past few years trying to see how well this works on big programs. And this little table here summarizes about 2 years' worth of work by some of our graduate students, mostly done in Virginia. So these are some programs. They are big programs. This is the number of lines of code in each of these programs. And we got these from these open source code repositories. The total is over 5 million lines of code, in case you can't read that in the back. And they had documented bugs. They had a lot of bugs in these programs, and they were bugs that were important enough that a human being had taken the trouble to fix it and commit the change to the repository. And so we had a total of 105 bugs. You can see how they were distributed there. And this was a big part of the work. We got this packaged up so we could send these programs and their test cases off to the, and our little repair mechanism, off to the Amazon cloud computing environment. And the advantage of that was then we could measure how much it cost to fix it. And so we did it. And I, of course, I'm the queen of genetic algorithms, but secretly I kind of have my fingers crossed because I don't really know if it's going to work. And we internally, kind of 20% was going to be a good hit rate, we thought. But in fact, on the first try, it fixed 52% of them, 55 out of the 105, at a cost of $7.32 per bug. And we think that's pretty good, and it's better than those bug bounty people. We're beating the competition. And then we did some tune-ups to the genetic algorithm. We got up to 57%, and now we've been running it with more resources, bigger runs. And I think as of a week or so ago, we were up to 69% that we've been able to fix. So we consider that to be a good result. Okay, what have we been doing recently? We've been trying to fix bugs in other languages. We've been interested in how good the repairs are. So my collaborator, Wes, actually did a human study. He has IRB approval. And we stood up very well, our automated repairs. But I've been interested in, like, why can this work? And it seems, on the face of it, very improbable that these random mutations would produce something very useful. And so one reason it works is a whole set of little algorithmic tricks, the secret sauce, that I have skated over all that in this talk. But we do have some good tricks that I think help. But the second thing that I want to talk to you about is this property of software that I think really enhances the probability of the search working. And so there's this thing in biology known as the neutral theory, because biology has the same problem. You know, you have these random mutations, most of which were believed to be deleterious. They're going to lower your fitness. So how could you ever, especially in small populations, how could you ever kind of get going and make new innovations? But anyway, this neutral theory was proposed in the late 1960s, and it turns out that many biological mutations leave the fitness unchanged, or even in some cases make it a little worse, but not badly worse. And this is now believed to play an important role in natural evolution. So we said, great, why don't we see how many neutral mutations we can get in our software? And so it turns out those mutations I described, the delete, the swap, and the insert, or copy and insert, when we run those on big programs with big test suites, 30% of the time they do not change the behavior of the program on the test suite. And this is how beginning programmers get their programs to work. Okay? I mean, and that number was a big surprise to me, and it's a big surprise to many of my colleagues. And so the question is that actually the reason that our search is working? We don't know that yet. We're trying to answer that. And what else could we use these neutral mutations for? So now I get to the third problem, and this one's short. It's the problem with monoculture. So our cyber infrastructure resembles this field of corn. All of our computers essentially run the same operating systems, the same applications. They store their files in the same place. And just like this field of corn, that makes them vulnerable to these widespread network-based attacks. So a natural thing to do for an engineer is say, let's make them all be different. And so that's kind of the apply biology idea. So the idea is if 30% of our mutations are neutral, that is, they don't change the behavior of the program, then why not give each of you your own unique copy of a program? Like we all download, I don't know, some Firefox plugin or something, but why does it all have to be the same? Why don't we all have ones that are slightly unique? And hopefully, they would be unique in ways that would be likely to disrupt attacks. And the idea here, I just want to point out that the idea here is to increase the cost of each attack instance. So if I can make it that to break into all the computers that all of you own, you have to do a new attack for each single instance, that will really change the game, the balance of power between the attackers and the defenders. Okay, so that's what we're working on now, but I have some results, but I'm not going to show them. But that's the general idea. Use these mutations, make every program be unique, and hopefully disrupt attacks. Okay, so why this? I have to say this. I'm very excited about this line of research, and why is that? Well, first of all, we in computer science think that our programs are like this watch. You know, lots of interconnected mechanisms, and if you touch any single part of it, it's a beautiful edifice, but if you touch any single part of it, it's going to fall apart. And I think these results we have, that 30% of the time you can change the program and nothing happens, really brings into question that assumption. So I'm interested in using it to explain the results we already have, and I'm also interested in using it to do this automated diversity. But for me, it really supports what I like to call the strong biology hypothesis for software. That is, our software somehow, through all the programmers and all the copying and all the editing and all the stuff that's happened over, the past 30 years, somehow our software, has acquired this biological property of neutrality. And I think that's very interesting, and I hope to spend some time working on that over the next couple of years. Okay, so summing up, I've talked about three things. Immunology, using immunology to enhance security and privacy. I've talked about using Darwinian evolution to address the problem of buggy software and to repair bugs automatically. And I've talked about the idea of trying to diversify our computing infrastructure to give us collectively a system-level robustness against replicated attacks. And so finally, just kind of looking forward, I want to point out that I live in the world of computers, but any complex system, it doesn't matter if it's an economy, it doesn't matter if it's a social system, it doesn't matter if it's biology, it doesn't matter if it's computer. I think it doesn't matter if it's the UNM budget. If we have a complex system with individual agents that are self-interested, economic players, and that have the ability to change their own behavior and evolve, then inevitably we can expect that malicious agents will emerge. And so I think these problems I'm talking about are much broader than just computer software. They really apply to almost all walks of life. And these arms races are inevitable. So I really like this idea that the lion, you know, for every lion that learns how to chase a zebra, there's someday going to be a zebra that learns how to ride a motorcycle and get away. And that's kind of what I think we live in, and I think it's exciting, and we should embrace it. Thank you very much. Now what? What?
Questions and answers?
Yeah, I don't, Chowky, you run the show from here. Do I answer questions for a while?
Sure.
Okay, sure. I'm happy to answer some questions. Joe.
So if you don't mind standing up a little bit.
Yeah. And I hope people in the back could hear me without the mic. By the way, if those of you who don't want to listen to the questions or to Chowky wrapping up, oh, never mind. Okay. Everyone likes to listen to you, Chowky. That's why I got to go first.
Thank you for a very interesting and provocative talk. I think none of us are surprised that it was. But would it be correct to say, I mean, with the 30% neutrality, does that mean that if I selectively remove lines of code one at a time, that a third of the time the program will be unaffected?
It's not always remove the code. I mean,
well, but you had the four subclasses.
That's one example.
So it doesn't apply to the removal, for instance.
Yeah, and the real question is, why is that?
Yes.
And it's, as far as I can tell, not entirely because of sloppy programming, which is what you might think. So we have done these experiments even on how many, bubble sort. Do most of you know what bubble sort is? It's like a 3-line program, 4-line program maybe. And even with bubble sort, 20% of the mutations are neutral. So some of it is that for any function that you want to compute, there's an infinite number of programs that will compute that function. And so somehow we're finding that, we're getting rid of redundancies. I don't understand it. I will say this, I think this is really exciting. My paper on this, our paper on this has been turned down 3 times now. So my colleagues tend to not believe it either, but it's true, I think.
That's your 30%. You should send it 10%.
Yeah, I should send it one more time. Exactly right. I'm working on that. Okay, I think there's a question behind you in the...
So I had a question about the negative recognizers in the digital immunology. I think that's some really neat stuff, but I'm curious about the ground truth of self. How is that going to be determined? And computers, one of the great things about them is they can be programmed to do all sorts of things that you want them to do. So self is going to be evolving over time in those sorts of systems. So could you talk about that for a little bit?
Right. Okay, so just to make sure everyone heard the question, I think the question's a great question. If in the negative recognition, let's just go back to that slide, way back there. Oh yeah, look at way back there. Sorry. Okay. So the question is, so we design all these detectors for self, and it's true, like in the body, we sort of have our genome, and we don't change our genomes a lot during our lifespan. But in computers, we potentially could change what self is a lot, dramatically, by like rebooting in a different operating system or something. And so that indeed is a problem. We've thought about that, and just a quick answer is one thing you could do is give these detectors lifespans. Tell them that they're only going to live for so long, and then they would die, which is not unlike what happens in the body. And so then if self moves a little bit, there's a pretty good chance that you'll move with it. So that's one answer. But we spend a lot of time worrying about that in our work, so that's a great question. Yeah?
School of Medicine. I'm not a computer scientist, and I apologize if my question doesn't make sense. In order for the system to evaluate right and to get the answer right, you need a fitness function that is correct. And that fitness function, it's hard to get it right, and also it's hard to stay the same. That fitness function sometimes has to change with time in order to adapt to the changes in the system.
Right, okay, so let me just...
How do you solve that problem?
Yeah, okay, let me just summarize. The objection is that in the scheme I discovered, we have this thing called a fitness function, which is static and written by people and might not be very good to what actually happens out there in the world. That's indeed true. And in the software example, I thought you were going to ask a different question, but in the software example, we live with however good the test suite is for the particular program. And that is kind of a proxy for what the program is supposed to do. And I will say that many people are skeptical about that. Many computer scientists are skeptical. But the results we have, I think, really speak for themselves, that that is a good enough proxy. And one thing about these fitness functions is that we've learned in genetic algorithms is you don't actually have to have a perfect fitness function to get good evolutionary results. And
Are you able to change it?
oh, like if you mean,
Evaluate the fitness function?
you mean like if I change the program? I don't quite.
Change the tests.
To change, yeah. Yeah, in fact, we could imagine using a genetic algorithm to evolve better tests. People do that.
That's exactly my question is, have you considered, you know, you have the sensitivity of the genetic algorithms to the programs. Have you considered running that same sort of application on the test suite itself and measure that sensitivity?
Yeah, so the question I'm being asked is, if I've got a lousy test suite, which often we do, these little green checks here, the input-output pairs, maybe we could use the genetic algorithm to come up with better test suites. And people do that. There's a whole field in software engineering called software testing. I'm actually going to go to a software testing conference this year. That should be an adventure. And there are many people who proposed using genetic algorithms to do this. There's a related problem, which is, what if you have 10,000 tests? So you have a really program that has a really good test suite. Well, it's going to be very expensive to run those tests on every single evaluation. And so another trick that we've used is called test suite sampling. And actually, people in the software testing community have even thought of using genetic algorithms to figure out which samples are the best. Okay, Mark.
My question is sort of related, and what I've sort of experienced is sometimes the best solutions are collaboration between evolution and intelligent design. And of course, these codes are not coming from primordial goo, right? They're intelligently designed, and
Right.
then what GenProg seems to do is a perturbation upon that. And it seems to me, as somebody who spends a lot of time fixing bugs, it would be a really useful tool to show me where the bugs are, and you know, it fixes the bugs for these special cases that are the benchmarks or whatever.
Yeah.
And then as the intelligent designer, I can go in and see what got fixed, and you know, it probably fixed it in a really stupid way that just works for these special cases, but it shows me what the problem is.
Okay, so that's a great question, and you are speaking with the heart of a computer scientist, because that's what most programmers think. But it is really the argument that appeals to intelligent design. So I don't really like the argument very much. And I personally really believe in evolution. What I will offer as counter evidence, and I can send you the paper if I remember, is this human study. So what my collaborator Wes did, once we had all these bugs, these 105 bugs, which it took a long time to get all that organized, then he was in a position to do a carefully randomized study where he presented human beings with the machine-generated repair and the repair that the human being had done, and then did a bunch of how maintainable was it, and asked a whole bunch of questions. And it turned out if you took the machine-generated repair, I mean, over all those repairs, the machine-generated repair combined with machine-generated documentation and ran that against the human-generated repair and the human-generated documentation, the machine won, handily. So our repairs are, I mean, they're more general than you would expect, and they stand up to human-generated. So I'm not buying the argument for intelligent design.
So
Okay.
on that, I think, you know, with
stop.
trying to make the argument for evolution, I think it's going to continue. I like to say a few words. First, I did serve with Stephanie. We were colleagues in the School of Engineering, first as faculty, then as chairs. And I learned a lot from her. You know, I never took one of her classes, but you know, one of the things that I learned from Stephanie is what she told me one time about UNM, and I still use that. She told me, you know, UNM doesn't have a lot of money, doesn't have a lot of resources, but what we have is people with passion. And there's no one who exemplifies that more than Stephanie. So I would like to close the evening by presenting Dr. Forrest with a citation. I'm going to read the citation first.
Holy smokes, I didn't even know that was there.
Yes,
Okay.
this has been hiding the whole time.
Man, I would have just taken that and run.
This is actually written by Dr. McGraw, our Vice President for Research. Stephanie Forrest is noted for her outstanding research, creativity, leadership, and mentorship of students and faculty. She joined UNM in 1990 and played a major role in transforming the Department of Computer Science into an interdisciplinary and high-activity research department, as well as securing UNM's reputation as a leader in the study of complex systems. Her research integrates biology and computation, ranging from computational modeling of evolutionary diseases such as influenza or cancer to designing artificial immune systems that fight cyber attacks. She also develops methods for automatically repairing bugs in software. Dr. Forrest has served in various capacities, including research professor and science board member and co-chair at the Santa Fe Institute, and served as chair of the Department of Computer Science for 5 years, where she improved educational resources, undergraduate enrollment, and faculty diversity. She recently participated in the prestigious 2012 World Economic Forum held in Davos, Switzerland. Her invitation to present at the forum was considered a major breakthrough for her department and the university. We proudly congratulate Professor Forrest as UNM's 57th annual research lecturer. I'm going to give you this, and then
Okay.
I want to say few more words here. To the audience, I would like to thank you for attending tonight's lecture. Special thanks to the members of the Research Policy Committee who offered their time to select tonight's lecturer, and to the staff in the Office of the VPR for planning such an event. As a reminder, please accept our invitation to join us afterward in the STEM room, where Dr. Forrest will be available, I hope, for some further questions. So, Stephanie, thank you so much. I'm honored to give you this.
Thank you so much, Chowki. You've been a great colleague.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Got it? One more? Thank you.
Holding hands with the provost. That's great.
With your
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I like talking about this. I'll see you at dessert.
coffee and dessert.